All right, I think that's my signal to go. Welcome, good morning everyone, to SYN 236, Revolutionize Remote Access to Existing Physical Desktops using XenDesktop. Some of you may not be aware that Citrix XenDesktop can provide high-definition experience to your existing PCs through what we call a FlexCast model, and we're here to educate you and go through a little more technical detail on that, what its value is. And I have the distinct pleasure to also present with Jason Robinson, architect at Kirkland & Ellis in the Chicago, Illinois region. Mm-hmm. And I should probably introduce myself as well. My name is Gabe Correjo. I'm a product manager within our HDX Windows App Delivery Group. And if you've followed along remote PC access through the last couple of years, you probably will see my name quite a bit. So I might be a little bit familiar to those out there in the audience. So Jason's going to come in and talk about his experience, his deployment, what it looks like for them, how they rely on it for their business. And I'm actually going to introduce that piece by talking through the technology itself. So first off, what I want to do is ask you to tweet about this session with the following hashtags. And if you are an existing remote PC access user or consumer, I would love to hear some positive comments or negative comments. And if you write a negative comment, I'm going to come at you and we're going to be business partners to make it a positive comment. So just be well aware of that. If you do tweet negatively, I will work with you to make it positive, right?
Yes.
Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about your business challenges. This business challenges goes back decades, right? Work shifting, teleworking, uncontrolled events, disaster recovery. These are all things every business has challenges with, and including desktop virtualization. Where are you going into the cloud? Where is your workspace model going with desktop virtualization? And desktop virtualization itself is simply a model of providing an experience to a desktop. And that experience to the desktop for decades has been VPNs, remote extensions, remoting protocols. And I don't know about you, but I used Citrix as a solution in this world, publishing through Metaframe and using some extensions myself to my users so they can connect in. So we have quite a bit of options for remote access. And when we look at desktop virtualization and what XenDesktop is traditionally known for many years, I look at it in a different way. You have your virtualization of the desktop, sure, but you also have the desktop delivery. That desktop is an application that can be delivered prior to you virtualizing it and have that same exact experience once it migrates into the cloud, whether that's data center, hybrid, or fully off-prem. So how did you solve this? This is exactly how customers are doing this today. They're using an on-premise appliance in the DMZ. They're loading up VPN tunnels or clientless type of access models, and then they're connecting in. But here's some challenges that are associated with that. There's not a lot of great BYO support when you choose that model. There's an unmanaged aspect to manage those endpoints because you might not own those VPN endpoints. The support overhead can be complex and expensive when you layer and tier these things together. The performance may be lackluster. It may be great within a certain confined network boundary close to the office, but once you extend and travel, go to hotels, go over wireless, it may become a challenge. And then lastly, it's difficult to secure. So you have to ensure that network tunnel is securely managed. Now, how some get around this is to leverage XenApp and publish applications where a user can then type in their machine name and use HDX to the XenApp server and then connect with an alternative technology back to those physical systems. So you get better BYO support because receiver is pretty much everywhere. You might have even worse performance because you're providing a protocol proxy transition point. And there's no end-to-end virtual channel control. So you can't make sure that maybe that smart access policy that you've applied to your XenApp applications also applies to those virtual channels of that alternative technology. However, it's less difficult to support because it aligns with your XenApp published support model. They have a problem connecting. Oh, follow the help desk scripts for published Notepad, for example. And while it's it could be considered a little more expensive because you're consuming multiple licenses at the same time instead of maybe a single license. So, what about the users? They are pretty frustrated when they use those types of models. They have these different ways to configure, different ways to find out what their machine names are, different ways to enter passwords, multiple authentication points that they have to go through that are unnecessary, and then things they have to remember. And Remote PC is built to eliminate all of that functionality and frustration. So the experience is exactly like launching an application in XenApp. You open up your application, whether that's in the receiver for a tablet or through a browser, that address, they enter their credentials a single time, and they click that or tap that desktop link. It's that easy. That easy, excuse me. No re-authentication, no more prompting, no re-entering of their desktop name, and it's seamless and simple, and that's its intention. There's not a lot of difficulty behind it or complexity behind it, and that's why we have 1,000+ customers and over 250,000 users happily engaging XenDesktop through the Remote PC Access technology. So overall, I'll get that for you later on if you'd like. Remote PC Access has that HDX experience directly to the PC. And that direct HDX experience to the PC means you can also control the virtual channels with Smart Access. You want to turn off the client drive mapping or turn off the local printers from their home system? Sure, you can do that, and it applies exactly like your XenApp applications do today. The automation of deployment is simple and seamless. You figure out how you package our desktop agent. Once it's in your electronic software delivery model, you just send it out. Secured, again, with NetScaler technology. So if you're a NetScaler shop for XenApp already, you've pretty much just doubled your value there because now you're able to combine application or your desktops with applications. If you have a clientless access model and you're looking to move forward into that world where you don't want to support those agents on those BYO systems or their systems, we have clientless support for receiver in HTML5. And if you're migrating to desktop virtualization, your user's experience doesn't change. It's exactly the same model. There's no experience differentiation between remote access to that desktop that's under their desk in the cubicle, or if it's located in the data center or the cloud or anywhere hyper-converged you can think. And lastly, I'm announcing experimental support for a Wake on LAN SDK. I'll have a slide on this a little bit later, but from 7.5 and later, we've had integrated support for System Center to leverage Wake on LAN. So if you've already deployed System Center in a management model to deliver applications and packaging, you can simply reuse that with the Remote PC Access technology to wake up the machines automatically and then connect with HDX. It's built right in. So let's take a look at the very complex architecture associated with Remote PC Access. So you have your XenDesktop management, and if you're already a XenApp deployed customer with 7.x, the previous session was IMA to FMA. Get to FMA, so everything's all self-contained and within the same management infrastructure. You have your corporate desktops, your gateway, and then your BYO clients. The first thing is you install the broker server, and if you're already a XenApp customer, you've got your licensing server, you've got the FMA infrastructure. You're just simply plugging in another controller. You don't necessarily need to if you're already XenApp 7.x. You're just wanting to augment perhaps a little bit more infrastructure if needed. You then take your virtual desktop agent and you qualify it on your sets of PCs or systems and package it, send it out through electronic software delivery model in a staged format Don't go and blast it to 90,000 systems. That's not a good idea. Maybe do it in stages of 5 or 10,000. Maybe take a week to do it. And configure NetScaler Gateway to connect the desktop protocol, the HDX protocol, to your PCs. And then lastly, the users obtain receiver or they go to their URL. So if you can imagine this taking maybe an hour or two to stand up, test, and take a look at, you're about right. It doesn't take very long at all. So the configuring broker piece, normally, how do I assign to desktops is the biggest question that I get. And it's all automated. It's part of your process of deploying the agent. You first have the Citrix XenDesktop Studio creating catalogs, which catalogs are where you map the machines. Your machines are typically in Active Directory OUs. So you just drag and drop an OU to the catalog where your machines are being registered. And once you have that done, you then go to the delivery group. So just like XenApp in 7.x, the same premise. You assign your remote access users to that delivery group, and then you assign your delivery group or you assign the catalog that you created before that to the delivery group, and you're done. As long as the user meets those two requirements, their machine is a member of that catalog via the OU membership, and the user is a member of that Active Directory group for that delivery group as well. The first time they log in after the agent is installed, they automatically get assigned to the PC. So there's no administration associated with this other than setting up the catalog, the delivery group, and then deploying out the agent. It's all done on the back end for you. And oh, by the way, there's a CTX article on how to turn off more than the one user to get assigned, because we will assign every new user that logs into that PC. So in order to capture that owner of that PC, you'll want to turn that off. So catalogs, real quickly. With 7.5 and later, there's a new way to add Wake on LAN to embrace your green computing model. And this catalog type is called Remote PC Access, and there's a drop-down to enable the green computing piece. You can grab any OU that you want and apply it against that catalog. So if you have branch offices with their own OU, you simply just add them to this catalog. And you can flow the members through the subfolders of those OUs. So each catalog can have its own settings and own members, and you can manage this by, again, like branch office, if you will. So then you select that previously created catalog. You add your groups or users directly so that you now have that algebraic equation going on, if you will, if-then. And once that user has the agent delivered through ESD to their PC, it automatically gets signed to them at local login. So deploying the VDA. There's a couple of different options. You've got the ISO that we ship with 7.6. You can put that on a network share and then point your ESD to go grab that. Or what you can do is in December, we released a standalone VDA. And that is downloadable through the optional components. And that allows you to just package simply that VDA and send it out to your endpoints instead of trying to figure all that out on your own. So make sure you grab that when you go deploy instead of trying to fiddle around with the ISO. Now, what's new? Real quickly, the monitor properly powering up after you disconnect. That's one of the many annoyances that we've heard. The monitor typically would stay blank, and you'd have to hit Control-Alt-Delete locally to get that session monitor to wake back up. Icon memory location. Oh, sorry about that. I hit the wrong. My bad. I just lasered you. Sorry. The icon memory location, that was also an annoyance for customers as well. They would get jumbled up. We preserved that. And then this session control. So when a local user walks up and there's a remote session currently to the PC, if you hit Control-Alt-Delete, it'll present a message to the local user and then present a remote message to the remote user. And that remote user has the option of whether or not they want that local user to disconnect their session. And you can also override this and also manage the timer that you see at the bottom. This was a very highly requested feature for it. So configuring NetScaler Gateway is pretty simple. a lot of you probably configure a certain protocol port using for an alternative technology. I just want to simply remind you that we have our own TCP ports that we need open to enable to those desktops for HDX. And there's also a high-level CTX article explaining the ports that we need for our product. A little bit about advanced configuration. So HDX display settings. If you're a previous Zen app customer and Zen Desktop 5.6 Feature Pack 1 customer, there's something you should be very well aware of. And that is that you have new display modes for HDX graphics settings. Okay, so you might have heard desktop composition redirection, H.264 compatibility modes, legacy modes, etc. So just be aware that you need to research those modes a little bit more in depth as you move forward from your previous versions and previous thought mentality around IC8 and ThinWire. So I'll make sure I call that out while I go through this slide. So with respects to what I'm building out here, on the left, what you see is kind of the model, like a mobility model, high latency type of model, and kind of where you would expect to configure your HDX policy to give the user the best experience. So in this example, I've got really constrained bandwidth, low CPU, and I don't use a lot of server-side video because I'm a user of just remote PC access. I want to get to my desktop apps. So legacy mode would be a great mode for me. If I've got more powerful systems on the other side of the connection, I have a fairly decent network connectivity model. My users are really well known. I know where they go. H.264 Enhanced Supercodec is perfect for me. Typically, we see this is the most popular model out there for display settings. And then the desktop composition redirection, where you have a high-powered system on the other side of the connection, where they can handle some of that GPU offload. And so what you want to do here is, again, think about your connection model, think about your community of users that are connecting in, and then apply the appropriate policies. So with 7.6 and 7.5, you're going to probably target H.264. It's simply probably the kind of the best, most agnostic protocol selection of the three. All right, so moving forward, so I can give plenty of time to Jason as he's patiently waiting for me. Real-world configuration. So to give kind of a basic, if I have some new folks on the internet, if I've got new folks in the room, I just want to kind of give you a ground level starting point. You want to have the most successful attempt at your internal POC and or your internal users, and maybe build up the graphics mode, maybe build up a little bit, those layers, if you will, to have an even better experience. So during your installation process, take a look at the /excludes article that I have here. You typically won't need a couple of these technologies when you install the VDA, and we're working on making that a lot better for you so you don't have to do this. But this actually lets you exclude our app virtualization for AppV as well as Profile Manager. And then the /component switch with VDA will exclude the receiver from installing alongside the VDA, because most of you most likely manage the receiver as its own application package. So you probably don't want to downgrade or attempt to upgrade the receiver as part of your process here. The behavior. So we found that a lot of experience for improving how you interact with your mouse, etc., can be improved using changing the mouse theme and disabling shadows. And what you see here when you get the presentation, these are links to blogs that help explain this a little bit more in detail. I'm simply highlighting these top-level bullet items for you. And down below, you'll see enable local UI messaging for users. That's the blog as well that goes into more detail on it. And HDX policies. So here's a sample of an HDX policy configuration that you can use. I actually use this configuration for coming in over a very challenging hotel network in North Carolina, in Asheville, North Carolina, over the New Year when I went out there for some rest and relaxation. and it's proved to be very useful for me. Just an example, anybody can configure their own policies. They can mix and match. They can do whatever they want with when it comes to those. So, remote PC access and Wake on LAN. Again, in 7.5, we announced the different methods that we support with System Center out of the box. You've got System Center deployed. We've got a solution. And the 4 methods, AMT provisioning, subnet directed unicast, and wake up proxy. If you're on 7.5, I recommend you going to 7.6 for a couple of critical fixes associated with this so that you can maybe get the wake up to work beyond the local subnet of the actual broker. So make sure you go to 7.6 in this case. And by the way, IPv6 is not supported or tested, so make sure that you understand these 2 notes. And we want to make sure that you also understand that the broker sends the Wake on LAN packet itself, not System Center, in the examples of subnet directed and unicast. We've had some network routing questions about that, and so I want to make sure I call that out in this session, that we do indeed craft the packet to send the wake up in that instance. So speaking of wake up, experimental support for any Wake on LAN deployment is what I'm proud to share with you today. And if you have a deployment where you would like to participate in crafting simply it's rewriting a DLL and then copying it onto the broker, and you're good to go, ready to use your own infrastructure for waking up systems. And it was all automated. So once you write the DLL, the user clicks the link, the DLL will go interact with your infrastructure. The infrastructure will say, here's the wake up packet to the PC. And in the front end, the user will be waiting. You'll see the wheel spinning. And as soon as that system is woken up, your session will automatically connect. So, CTX article coming soon on this, and I wanted to make you aware of that right away. So, migration, you've got 2 options for the VDA. Uninstall, reboot, install, reboot. Simple as that. Upgrade in place, reboot. 2 options. 2 options for the broker. Upgrade in place, reboot, side by side. Side by side for the broker, I want to call this out a little bit more in depth. So, you're going to build a new controller site. Okay, how do I get my VDAs to start to register? How do I get my users over to that new infrastructure? It's pretty simple. Create that catalog and delivery group and make sure it's exactly the same as your previous controller. The VDA software can be upgraded at any time. Okay, we typically have a very flexible support matrix for when a broker is upgraded, what VDAs are supported with it, and typically it goes back all the way to 5.6, anyway, feature pack 1. Add that controller site to your storefront aggregation point or web interface if you still have that, and then point the VDAs to the new controller. Once you've done that, the users log in one time, and guess what? They get reassigned to their PC. Okay, retire your old controller, and you're done. Do it in a staged approach, of course. I certainly wouldn't, again, do this 90,000 users overnight. You can try, but then they'd have to log in for the first time, and some of them may not want to do that. And you actually share a little bit more on that topic. And speaking of that, it's about time you heard from a customer and less from me. So here's Jason Robinson.
How you guys doing? My name is Jason Robinson. I don't work for Citrix, so if I sound like I do, it's just because I've come to really appreciate the value in this product. I am a technologist. I've been in IT for over 15 years. I stopped counting after 15. And I've been working specifically with Citrix technology in the remote access and mobility space probably for about the last 6 or 7 years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the company I work for. It is a law firm, Kirkland & Ellis. It is a corporate law firm. So their business is acquisitions and mergers, IP, litigation, real estate, big real estate, that kind of stuff. We have about 3,600 users. 1,600 of those users are attorneys. And so that is particularly my customer. Those are the ones who I'm really trying to help them to become more productive and more agile and mobile. You can see our layout all over the world. We're in the United States, Europe, and Asia. You see our various offices in the United States, Europe, and Asia. We're in London, Munich, and Europe. Beijing, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. And so that's important when we start talking about how the VDAs are laid out. So I'll touch more on that in a little bit. So let me tell you our use case and how we got to the point of using remote PC. The in-office experience, this is an expression that our CIO uses when he tries to communicate to me what he wants our users to have in terms of remote access. He wants them to feel like, work like they're in the office, no matter where they are. But there's one caveat that he gave me to this, and it's without traveling with a notebook. They don't want to have to carry the firm asset with them in order to have this experience. And so, traditionally we gave them VPN access, but that doesn't work. We tried XenApp, and we still leverage XenApp, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the problem there is it's still not their experience. It's not their computer, and you guys understand why. So we had to find something else, and that's where a remote PC came in. But you may say, well, what about some of the remote desktop extensions? Gabe kind of touched on this a little bit. We tried it. And here are some of the challenges we found. The single sign-on just really isn't there. There's a whole lot of logins. If you've used any of these, you understand what I'm talking about. We have a requirement for dual factor. So we have to have an RSA prompt and all those things. And being that I work for the law firm, these are attorneys, and everything is about billing time. So every second of every minute of every hour of every day has to be accounted for. And I actually had one attorney tell me how much it translated to in dollars of having to go through this process. And so that just gives you an idea of why we had to do something. Resolution matching, the user has to think about his screen size and all of that. That was an issue. Dual monitors, supporting that was challenging. And then just administering it, associating users with computers was a challenge. Once you get over 500 users, it became very, very, very challenging to do. The administration was slow, and it was just hard to manage. So again, another reason we had to move. And then here's one. We already had an investment in Citrix. My CIO says, we're paying all this money for a subscription to Citrix. Why are we also paying money for another solution to do this? I feel like we should be able to use what we have to access the PCs, and he was right. So that's how we got to wanting to use remote PC. But here's a point I want to stress to you guys, because this might be a problem that you have. The question is, why wouldn't we just do virtual desktops? Doesn't that solve the problem? How many can relate to this, right? So everyone says it's too expensive, questions around performance, wanted to retain an offline experience, and please just don't take my desktop. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to work the way I used to. If you can relate to this, then these are problems you're going to try to tackle head on, and it may not work for you. It may be hard to get funding to get into VDI, but remote PC is a strategic play because it kind of gets you there. You're already using the interface, but you're just using it with physical desktops. So the point I'm saying is don't if you have licenses with XenDesktop already, or maybe you have XenApp licenses and there's an upgrade opportunity, you may want to take that opportunity and just go for physicals first, and then at a future point convert those to virtual desktops. So I hope that point makes sense to you guys, because that was really the play for us. So we started a pilot. The pilot consisted of Feature Pack 6, or Feature Pack 1, XenDesktop 5.6 Feature Pack 1. We started with 100 users, and we did it for 3 months, and it was awesome. I mean, it was everything that we thought it would be. The assignments were great. Users were loving it. They're like, once I log in and I get connected, I feel like I'm at my computer. This is awesome. But we ran into a challenge when we tried to expand it from a production standpoint. We introduced a third-party credential provider. We had a requirement for a self-encrypting hard drive, and it had its own credential provider, and it butted heads with the Citrix remote PC credential provider, and called Citrix, and there's no support for that in 5.6. And they said, you know what, you need to go to 7.1. So we were in the middle of doing this rollout. We had to scramble to get that done. And we made it happen. We made it happen. We got to 7.1, had to apply some hot fixes, and there were some challenges with that. I'll talk to you about why you need to look at the hot fixes if you're thinking about deploying this. We have 2,300 VDAs, so 2,300 physical computers scattered all over the earth with the virtual desktop agent installed, and users are logging into these computers remotely using this solution. Sometimes we have laptops. Ideally, you want to use a desktop, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you have users with laptops, you don't have to swap them out for a desktop. This will work on a laptop. Our VDA install is a part of our build process. So when we give a user a computer, the VDA is already there. So we're building it into our build process. We used to deploy it using our deployment software, but now they just get the software already installed when they get the computer, which is nice. And then the assignments are made at the time of provisioning. So Gabe talked about the auto assignment that's built in, and that's really nice. If you can get your users in groups and OUs and have them log in at one time, it'll automatically pair them. We had a need for this to happen the minute we gave the computer to the user. We wanted that assignment to happen. We didn't want to have them log in and trust that they would do what we needed them to do. So we created some scripts. And the good thing about XenDesktop is it has these great PowerShell commandlets that you can leverage to create scripts to do all kinds of things, and assignments is one of them. So we were able to manually write a script to make the assignment for the user, and we run it at the time of deployment. And it pairs the user with the computer, and it's great. So make sure you look at the SDK on the PowerShell scripts. And then our endpoints, so the computers that people are using to connect in, are all over the place. Windows computers, Mac computers, iPads, and sometimes the users are using any combination of these to connect in. So they oftentimes have both Macs and Windows. Here's an interesting thing, too, that we're seeing. So I went into one attorney's office, and he was using a Mac. And I saw he had Windows installed. And so I said, oh, what are you using? Is that Parallels or is that Boot Camp? He's like, no, this is my computer, my office computer, whatever you guys call it. And I realized he was sitting in the office using remote PC to connect to a laptop that he had in a drawer, but it was connected, and that's how he works every day. So just to give you an idea of how this can be leveraged. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how our communication flow works, and I think this is the coolest part of this product, particularly if you're a global company. So we have our delivery controller is in Chicago. Our web interface, soon to be storefront, is in Chicago. And then our ingress point is a NetScaler, which is also in Chicago. And then at the bottom there, you see our VDAs. So those are the computers that are sitting in the office ready for connections. The registrations are happening on the LAN. All the back-end traffic from the NetScaler is all local area network. So here's and so that's what the HDX flow looks like. HDX in to those VDAs. Here's where it gets really cool, though. So we have offices on the West Coast and on the East Coast. So those users, those VDAs have to register over our WAN. And that's a 21 millisecond connection in the East Coast and a 56 millisecond connection in the West Coast. And that's where the registrations are happening. We don't have delivery controllers in those offices. So that's all coming in over our WAN, and we don't see any issues. The HDX traffic, unknown milliseconds. Of course, you're on the internet, so you don't know what that is. But over the internet to our Citrix NetScaler, and then back over our WAN, okay, to the VDA. So that's the way the traffic is flowing. And we don't have any issues with this. I mean, this is actually where I thought we were going to see the biggest challenges, all the communications over the WAN. And we haven't had any problems, particularly on the East Coast, where you see there's 56 milliseconds. So, if you're a global company and you're thinking about leveraging this, it'll work over your WAN. And here's a look at the traffic. Just curious to see what our traffic looks like. Gabe talked about the DCR, desktop composition redirection, versus H.264 versus legacy mode. And you guys are going to need to make a decision on which one you're going to use. It's in the XenDesktop policies, and it really depends on the endpoint the users are going to be using, how powerful it is, and what kind of connections are they having. Are they low bandwidth connections, or do they have at home, 5 gig or 5 meg or more at home? It may determine which way you go. But we're seeing, and this is back end, this is what's on our WAN, so I don't confuse you. This is WAN traffic. The average bandwidth is about 200 to 400 kilobits per second, and that's average. So you see there are some spikes there. We peaked in this one session all the way up to 1.8 megabits per second. So, maybe they were doing YouTube or file sharing or something like that. But, it's not a heavy load on your WAN, but know what you're putting on the WAN before you do it. And then this is the coolest part. So we've got offices, as I showed you initially, in Munich, London, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong. And those offices have VDAs. Those VDAs are also registering over the WAN. And look at the milliseconds on that. That's 223 milliseconds to our Munich office, 228 to Beijing and Shanghai. So we didn't have to put controllers everywhere, right? We just allow them to register. Now notice I'm not showing any HDX traffic because we're not making the users come back to Chicago as an ingress. And I know this is a little cluttered, but I'm going to try to explain this. So what we're doing, we've got NetScalers, you guys. So those are the NetScalers there, right? So we've got NetScalers, one in London, or a pair in London and a pair in Hong Kong. And so that's the ingress point. That's how users on the internet connect in. So like, for instance, you see you have an EMEA user connecting up, and then over there you have an Asia user connecting up. That's all HDX traffic to a NetScaler. And then if the NetScaler is in the same office with the VDA, then that's all WAN, that's all local area network traffic from that point forward for HDX. And again, the registrations are happening over the WAN back to Chicago. So I'm going to play this forward. Now, here's also where having those two ingress points comes into play. So we put NetScalers in Hong Kong, we put NetScalers in London, and so what that does is instead of having the HDX traffic go through that long haul of 200 some odd milliseconds, we've cut it down, say for instance in EMEA, 23 milliseconds. So now it's more local, it's more like our Chicago experience. And then same thing for Hong Kong, right? So user in Shanghai or Beijing is only 40 milliseconds over the WAN versus that 200 and some odd. So you get an idea of how you can distribute your environment so that you can leverage these VDAs wherever they might be, and you have a really great experience, almost like you would with your XenApp, but it's their computer. And so yeah, there again is that registration, and that's the coolest part, I think. So I told you we did a migration from 5.6. So we started our pilot at 5.6 feature pack 1, and we went to 7X. Here are some of the things that happened over the course of that migration. So one of the things we did, and I won't blame anybody, but we installed the VDA first at 7.x, still connecting to a 5.6 controller. And we thought that'll solve our problem because the support for the new credential provider is in the VDA, so we'll be fine after that. We had all sorts of registration issues. So if you're gonna do this, follow the migration path, and you need to upgrade your controller as well as the VDA. So we stood up the 7X controller in parallel, just like Gabe talked about in his slides for migration. But the assignment piece, again, we leveraged PowerShell scripts again, and this time we did a bulk migration. So we used PowerShell to grab every user that was in our 5.6 controller and then assign them in our 7X controller. And that's how we achieved the migrations. Black screen issues. So when we would every time we had a user doing UAC, anything that would invoke a UAC prompt, the screen would go black. We had blue screen issues. So I mentioned some of our users were using laptops. When they would undock, you get the blue screen of death. There were memory leaks in the audio service. Audio service was crashing. We had printing issues. All of those issues were fixed by Citrix in hot fixes. So moral of the story is apply the hot fixes, look at the readmes on those, make sure you're applying those things because you may have issues and they'll be resolved by the hot fixes. So I would love to tell you, so everything is remote PC now. We converted everything to remote PC, but that's not the case. We still have VPN access for users who want to travel with their company asset. That said, there is a shift of people abandoning the VPN approach because now they have this experience with remote PC. So that becomes a more usable experience now with this access. And so this is the tiered access. And it was interesting, I saw Templeton talking about this, I think it was Tuesday, where he talks about the if-then-else approach to remote access and having a collection of things that you do for different circumstances. And that's kind of where we are. Our goal, though, is to get to the and approach. And we would love for that to be VDI. And we see that remote PC is sort of a step in that direction just because users are already used to that interface. Lessons learned, as I said, make sure you get those hot fixes applied. Also, the receivers. There are fixes in the receivers that may impact your experience, particularly if you're using Mac or some of the other platforms. Make sure you have the latest. Understand the graphics mode. So, and I think it's the XenDesktop Handbook that describes those graphics modes very well. And then you figure out what your users have in terms of connections and computers. And you don't have to standardize on one, DCR or H.264. We're standard on H.264 because it seems to solve the majority of our use cases, but you can use policies to have some users using DCR, desktop composition redirection, and then other users using H.264. So you do have that flexibility. So read the handbook and understand how you can configure that. All Intel chipsets are not created equal. So make sure you guys understand what models of computers you have, what the chipsets are, and test the different chipsets. Or if you've got different drivers on different models, make sure you're testing your VDA install and that the computer functions after you've installed the VDA, because you could have issues and you don't want to do that. You don't want to deploy it if you have issues. Leverage the PowerShell stuff. There's a lot of cool things you can do with PowerShell to aid your migrations and even your deployment. And then test everything. Anytime you make a change, if you're upgrading your VDAs, just make sure you have a process for testing all your models of your computers, because you got a lot of drivers, a lot of different graphics cards and all those things, and it has to work with the VDA. And so make sure you're testing all that stuff before you deploy. And then engage Citrix. They're trying to be on top of things in terms of testing everything, but we've got tons of equipment in our office that really they would never be able to test all of it. So if you're seeing an issue, report it, and likely they'll aid you. Gabe and I work very closely in getting our environment very stable. So definitely make sure you're reporting issues if you're seeing them. And that's all I have. I don't know if you wanted to do questions or... No,
that's great, Jason. So just to kind of close things out, that last point, engage Citrix early. I want to highlight that. If you have an issue with the product and technology, we're internally themed on quality, and it's a very important topic for us. We want to ensure that you have the best experience with the product. So if you have to call in or bring in a partner because you have an issue, get a hold of us. Let us know immediately that there's an issue that isn't being resolved within a certain period of time, whatever your SLA agreement is with your business partners. We want to ensure that, as you said earlier, time is money. And if you don't have a happy user, you're not going to have a technology that's deployed within your base build that your business relies on. So I want to ensure that particular message is heard loud and clear. So, in closing, while we have the last 40 seconds of our time, I want to have you walk out of here and have the internet view this, be able to take the information that we've provided you and start a POC. Typically, IT admins are the first ones that deploy this. Then they provide it to their pal in a business unit and say, hey, check this out. Look how awesome this is. And then word of mouth builds from there. And I heard that yesterday from a customer. They deployed a couple of hundred systems, and it built out within 6 months to 27,000 users, and they had to stop it because they weren't prepared for that amount of user demand. So if you go and try this, I want you to be aware that your users will love it. And I think we're literally out of time now. So I'd like to thank Jason, and I'd like to thank everyone in the room. Have a great Synergy.